Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Hodder. I'm the former chair of the Construction Industry Council, and I chair its Climate Change Committee, which oversees the implementation of its action plan. So today, over the recent years, the buildings and construction industry has been showing a momentous culture shift, reporting much more awareness and activity around climate literacy than was ever the case a few years ago. This session is going to focus on key industry findings on the state of climate education as presented on the Climate Framework's latest report. It emphasises the importance of the Global Climate Framework Initiative introduced to accelerate the reskilling and upskilling across the global built environment sector. It further describes the climate framework's implementation into the new and existing climate-focused training programs as exemplified by the courses hosted by the RIBA, CIBSE, and the London South Bank University. We have two speakers this morning. Firstly, Mina Hasman. Mina leads Skidmore, Owings & Merrill's sustainability and wellbeing daily operations. And as a recognised expert in her field, she's been elected to and is actively involved in the UK GBC, Board of Trustees, RIBA Council, and many other organisations. Mina regularly contributes to the wider climate change, sustainability and wellbeing debate in her role as tutor at various academic institutions, as well as regular speaking appearances at many international events. She's also author of the RIBA Climate Guide, which equips the built environment professionals with key knowledge to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So Mina will give a 20-25 minute presentation on the climate education report to set the scene on the current state of the industry when it comes to climate focused training. Following Mina, we then have Alex Tait, who is Director of Practice at the RIBA. Alex is responsible for best practice standards and member support. His department is responsible for competence requirements and guidance for members on project and practice management. He works closely with experts from across the construction industry on issues ranging from procurement, insurance, building safety, sustainable development and ethical practice. And Alex oversees the RIBA Plan of Work and the RIBA 2030 Climate Change. Alex will share how the RIBA has defined its mandatory competencies, particularly those focused on climate literacy, and how it's implementing them for its members. And then what I would say is that during the presentations, if you would like to just put any points in the Q&A box or any questions you might have, and to prime that, we have Henry Fenby-Taylor, who will join us as well. Henry is an innovation consultant delivering digital transformation for the built environment. He's a member of the Construction Industry Council's 2050 Committee on behalf of IET, an ambassador for Zero Construct, and a supporter of the newly formed Circular Built Environment Group. He's a believer that infrastructure can be responsive to the needs of net zero policy, infrastructure owners and citizens through technology. So that's the introduction. As I said, please put your questions into the Q&A box as they occur, and then we'll have hopefully a good discussion at the end of the presentations. So with that, I'm going to hand over now to Mina, who will make a presentation. Mina.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Stephen. I'm just going to start sharing my screen, and hopefully you can all see my screen well and hear me well. Perfect. I assume that that's the case. Thank you once more for inviting me to share with you some of the key industry's observations on the state of climate education today. I would like to start the conversation by briefly introducing the climate framework as the core initiative facilitating capacity building across the buildings and construction industry and the related academia for climate action. and then present some of the cross-industry action group's key findings on the recent report, on the recent study, which has culminated in a report over the last year. And this report, as Stephen had mentioned, specifically looks at the evaluation of the state of the industry on its current progress on delivering climate-focused training. If I can briefly start with the Global Climate Framework Initiative, this initiative aims to ensure that both the direct and indirect impacts of our decisions within the built environment sector are consciously acknowledged and addressed against the UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, as you can see here. And this is an initiative hopefully many of you have heard of by now, but it's worth iterating that it's an initiative that was established 3 years ago as an international voluntary effort. To date, it is still voluntary, with the really aim to break down the industry's existing silos by cross-pollinating experiences and expertise across a global built environment community in order to establish a common ground and create a common language around climate change, which I believe we so desperately need. And the second aim of this transdisciplinary initiative is to align expectations and create a thread of knowledge weaved through from industry to academia and vice versa, in order to ensure continuity and consistency in the way that knowledge is built, disseminated, and built upon throughout different stages of a built environment actor's life. And I specifically mentioned built environment actor because this is not an initiative that's only looking and addressing the needs of the design community of the built environment sector, but also those that are informing policies, defining standards and regulations, as well as those that are making key decisions on investment and others in relation to the built environment sector and landscape. And by bringing generations together under this initiative and sharing knowledge and experiences, the overarching aim is really to unite the built environment sector and academia much more than it currently is in the state, in order to reskill and upskill with the intent to build a greater capacity collectively for climate action. And in this way, we're able to close feedback loops by bringing in the know-hows of practice into the next generation of built environment professionals' core education. And also by leveraging the best academic research, we're able to inform progress and also help deliver the innovation the construction sector continuously needs. So how does the climate framework structure and taxonomy look like? As mentioned before, the framework contextualizes the UN Sustainable Development Goals within the built environment landscape and focuses on the goals that can directly be impacted by the work we deliver across the sector. And it's organized around these 6 overarching themes as presented here in colorful bubbles. And these themes, as well as their sub-themes or topics, aim to cover all disciplines represented within the built environment sector as much as possible. From interior design to architecture to engineering of any kind, to urban and as well as city planning, among others. And they aim to address the impact the built environment professionals work at different scales, from individual buildings to cities as well as regions. So it's really covering a wide spectrum of scales and context in relation to the topics that are presented within the climate framework. And acknowledging the importance of and also the need for embedding a holistic as well as interdisciplinary approach into the sector, the climate framework took over 2 years in formulating its set of topics. And in this process, it went through a really sort of a global consultation where over 750 individuals provided valuable input, which also has led to the tremendous support we have received on this initiative from more than 100 organizations internationally to date. And throughout these years, the RIBA became the first professional institute in the world to adopt the climate framework structure and informed its climate literacy mandatory competence requirements, which are currently presented in their knowledge schedule that can be seen here. And Alex will shortly talk about this in further detail, I'm sure. And then commissioned by the RIBA Publishing, the RIBA Climate Guide was consequently created to provide guidance on these holistic topics to all built environment professionals around the world. And I would even say to those teaching in academia. So this is also the emphasis that this guide brings in linking the academia with industry together. And I cannot iterate enough that this guide and this book is meant for all built environment professionals, not just for architects or those practicing in the UK. And our vision for the climate framework is that all the varying professional institutes and academic institutions, as well as member organizations, government bodies, and private practices would adopt its structure of topics as a shared curriculum and use it to build their customized, appropriately detailed content on according to their constituents' needs and also the area of focus and expertise. In this manner, we can create consistency on the topics that are covered, which can lead to creating common language around climate change that I talked about before, both for the industry and academia, which I believe we desperately need. And over the last 3 years, we have undertaken a series of collaborative efforts under this initiative, both with professional institutes as well as academic organizations. And among these, our latest collaboration with London South Bank University has resulted in a report we published at the end of last year on climate education. And this report gives a brief overview of our industry-wide findings on especially how the professional institutes in the UK are progressing on their climate-focused training. And we would like to take this opportunity to many of you who have participated in this study and provided valuable insights. If I can start by giving a bit of context, the built environment and construction industry, as Stephen has mentioned, has really in the recent years been showing a momentous culture shift, reporting much more awareness and activity around climate literacy than that was the case a few years ago. However, for every organization that is striving for improvement, there are some still stuck in business as usual mode, making only limited ad hoc progress. And in our collaborative effort with LSBU over the last year, we want to really get to the bottom of this and understand the core reasons of this lag, of this delay, when the business case for and also the urgency of an industry-wide reskilling and upskilling for climate action has been so clear. And in the interviews we have conducted across the key professional institutes, including the RIBA, CIBSE, ISTRACTI, and many others, and also among their different departments of education, training, and membership, we have concluded that although the majority of the professional institutes has reviewed their training offer against the climate change agenda, only a quarter of them to this date have committed to mandatory CPDs on climate change and are also effectively actioning on reskilling and upskilling their members. And this in turn has been leading to the overall industry's delayed action, I would say, on this very critical topic. And in our consultations, we also have discovered that there are 4 main reasons on this delayed action, which include a lack of common and a collaborative approach, as well as resources, which collectively leads to organizations duplicating content if they have the resources to create content, or not actioning at all due to mainly lack of resources, both in terms of financial and also in terms of finding expert individuals who can create the required new content if that's the need. And throughout this effort, it also became obvious that today's business models and systems also hinder cross-industry collaboration and delivery of courses, because substantial resources are needed to create and deliver content, and the business models, as well as concerns around IP rights, prevent cost share of the content creation, which in turn gets reflected in the high course cost to members and practitioners, and this in the end limits uptake. And although some courses are provided today and some great ones are provided today, their formats are also not very accessible to all necessarily, especially when we consider practitioners at their different career stages. And coupled with the pressures of the day-to-day work, the lack of also mandatory competencies across the industry does not give a great incentive to practices to allow their employees the time to reskill and upskill urgently and more effectively. And in our interviews and consultations throughout this effort, we also have concluded that there are a series of actions that we can introduce, which could serve as potential solutions to these challenges, which currently persist across the entire industry. The first of is the mutual adoption of the climate framework as the shared curriculum structure and taxonomy, and utilizing its global community as well as its online platform as a network of content creators, both from industry and academia. This can significantly help reduce duplicating efforts and also create a more holistic content fast, especially for the content that needs to be created from scratch. The second solution would stem from developing new cooperative business models and a profit share approach for paid and joint courses. This can promote easier and wider collaboration across different organizations. And also a single common peer-reviewed online library of resources will be of value, which currently exists in the format of the Climate Library under the Climate Framework Initiative. And this library can be further developed in a global cross-industry, learning platform where modular courses can be displayed. And these modular courses can be used individually and or collectively as part of a complete course or a program around net zero or retrofit, for example. Or they can also be accessed individually should the audience prefer to do that. And the last key solution to these challenges faced in the industry today would rely on all the professional institutes and institutions committing to the CIC's Climate Action Plan, which also stipulates the adoption of a shared cross-industry climate framework curriculum for their CPD programs, and also the provision of a freely accessible content to a certain level, as much as possible, that can easily fit within practitioners' day-to-day work. And that's the essential and important part, because in the absence of lack of mandatory competence requirements set by the various professional institutes, any content that is provided by anyone, really by any organization, needs to be scalable and adaptable to a practitioner's day-to-day work. And to help guide organizations also in this journey, in our report, we have created a roadmap with a clear set of 10 actions to lead the industry to come to a more consistent and holistic climate-focused training at scale. If I can walk you through these actions very briefly, they include signing up to the Construction Industry Council's Climate Action Plan, as I mentioned before, publicizing organizations' commitments, outlining an implementation plan to deliver these commitments, collaborating with others, especially both in the industry and academia, to help build the resources that are needed, and evaluating organizations' resourcing needs, both financially and in terms of manpower, for creating new content if and as needed. Planning the roadmap that is unique to the organization, but there are a lot of guidelines within the CIC's Climate Action Plan that can give indications of how this roadmap could be created. So this roadmap could be also created in collaboration with others within the same organization, such as those with different departments of education, training, and membership, which we observed during our consultations of this study, that these departments within the same organization often work in isolation, which was quite surprising, at least to me. And so a better collaboration between different departments within the same organization will help amplify the actions that are taken and also clarify this roadmap that a single organization may want to pursue to address the climate change focused training. And delivering on the commitments, even if it means taking small steps rather than leapfrogging, and training the trainers in the process, which is a critical part of this equation, I think of the success equation, as and when needed, and asking the right questions at the right time, and finally sharing experiences, findings on key challenges and know-hows of how turning those challenges into opportunities can lead to progressive actions with the wider industry would really be helpful, I think, in accelerating and not only guiding others, but also accelerating the elevation of the entire sector, which is at the heart of the focus here. And as can be seen here, the cross-industry collaboration lies at the heart of this set of actions, which is at the essence of the Climate Framework Initiative and the global community it has been building over the last few years. And if you would like to read more about the climate education report mentioned throughout this presentation, we will welcome you to visit the website of the Climate Framework, where you can download this report and or contact us at contact@climateframework.com. And I'll be more than happy to help answer any questions you may have later on. But thank you.
Thank you, Mina. We'll come back to some questions after Alex's presentation. So I'd like to now hand over to you, Alex, just to really talk about what the RIBA is doing.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, I've got a few slides too. I won't take up lots of time, but I'm going to focus on a couple of areas. One, where we've got to, how we got there, and then some of the challenges that we're still encountering and trying to work through. So our work began in, I think, 2019. Our council had joined the declaration of a climate biodiversity emergency, and we're looking at kind of a two pieces of work to support our climate action endeavors. One was around competence, which is what we're going to focus on today, and the other was on setting some kind of standard. So the 2030 climate challenge is what we created as part of that, and that has now morphed into a much wider built environment, a net zero carbon building standard, should I say, and which we should hopefully have in the next 6 months or so. This is our education and professional development framework. We published this towards the end of 2019. It's an update on our education core headings. It has the piece that is most important now, our mandatory competencies, but it also then reflects a few other things like, a career in architecture, not just becoming an architect and that's it. And then our core CPD curriculum, and then the idea of increased specialization. And we've looked at various different versions of this. We only at the moment have them for conservation architects, climate advisors, and we are developing a principal designer assessment. So there's potential area in there around sustainable development for us to look at. And Mina is pioneering something in that area around carbon assessment at the moment. So onto our mandatory competencies. We'd already got approval, I think, in 2017 for some form of knowledge assessment in health and safety. In fact, maybe even before that, may have been 2016. And we are this year just about to make that part actually mandatory. Here is our knowledge schedule. So Mina's talked through the climate framework and the work of that, and I'm going to do our mini version of it too. We don't need to go into all the detail of what this is, but the basics are already covered by Mina's presentation in terms of the climate framework's subject matter. Ours is perhaps just got a slightly RIBA flavor, but what we started with in 2019 was looking at our UN Sustainable Development Goals and identifying those that are most relevant to buildings and construction. So in fact, these are all relevant to all buildings in some way. And then we had to slightly relabel them a little bit to make them a bit more clear and understandable for our membership. And then identifying the existing performance standards, design standards that you can follow to try and do better in these. Pulling together some kind of more coherent approach. And this was put into our Sustainable Outcomes Guide, which we published, I think, beginning of 2020. Shortly after that, we also put in some more serious work into the kind of the rest of the process, not just the idea of checking for outcomes, but also the full design process. So in 2020, we redid the plan of work and included in that all of those outcomes and tracking them. So there's a whole chapter in the free guide about those sustainable outcomes and the delivery and the key tasks for each of them per stage. But to go with that, we also had something we called Plan for Use, which is really our version of soft landings, or the BSI's BS 8536. Sorry about the designations, but it's a operability briefing and design standard. So this was our kind of core approach to getting some of those subject matters embedded in the design process as a standard offer, whilst also looking at what does that mean from a competence perspective. So that's where we went to Mina and asked Mina if she would help us come up with an approach. And instead of doing it for us, Mina's suggestion was we did it for everybody. As you can see, those sustainable development goals and a few extra parts that we hadn't quite nailed properly in our version did come through the climate framework. So those 2 years resulted in then us being able to take on board that work, and others too, but we're hoping to be able to still be first when it comes to making it mandatory. So that's where we got to. That's the basis of how we got there. Right now, this is the kind of history of the testing part of it, the mandatory competence. So we published a handbook in 2020 for our health and life safety part. We did a pilot a couple of years ago. We've been running a voluntary test now for about 18 months. And towards the end of this year, we'll be rolling that out in a mandatory nature. The specifics of that are still to be tweaked, because this is something you don't do lightly. And then following that, our climate literacy and ethical practice and mandatory competences will come along. So we've recruited Mina again to help us obviously write the book, but also we'll be looking at how we do assessment. So some form of testing that will be requiring members to pass to be able to stay as members. And that's the thing that's the big deal. So we did ask, we didn't just do this ourselves. We went out and asked our members what they thought. There was a good 400 to 500 responses. This is the kind of general breakdown, and it shows that there's some pretty good support, but not everywhere. We actually still can't quite work out why that the practices of a 3 to 4 size and 2 a bit are less keen on it than everybody else. But that's still something for us to worry about and try and work through. But this just shows that we can't just enforce super change really quickly. We've got to be really careful, because if half our membership don't pass this test, decide they don't want to do it, we can't lose half our membership. We wouldn't exist, and no professional body could do that. So we've got to be really careful. So it's slow. It's a careful, slow rollout of professional revalidation. So that's a kind of our basic learning. And we've been trying to tackle this for now a few years. As I said, we've got our health and life safety assessment is complete. It will become mandatory shortly. We'll hopefully not lose too many people through it. That'll be our tester, and we have to be really honest about that. It's not easy to put this kind of thing through. If we lose people, too many people, we won't be allowed to do it again. So I've got to make sure that when we press go on that, we're definitely going to make it work, because our council and our board are not going to let us do it again if we mess it up. So it's a big deal, professional revalidation. It's not a small change. It's not, we're not just saying we want you to do some extra CPD. We already say that. We have mandatory core topics. So we expect, I know it's only 2 hours, but we do expect 2 hours per subject area. So sustainability in the wider sense, 2 hours, same with health and safety, and a load of other things. This change does mean it's a form of professional revalidation. We'll be doing it every 5 years. And we have authority to do that. We're just making sure it will definitely work. So that's what we've got to at the moment. I said it's hard, but we're still committed to doing it. Thanks, and I'm around for questions.
Thanks, Alex. Right, Henry, I just wonder if you'd like to join us for welcome, Henry. And as I said at the outset, if any of those presentations have raised any questions, then do put them into the Q&A box. Don't be shy, we haven't had any yet. But Henry, in terms of those two presentations, what are your thoughts? You've got some questions or discussion you want to raise with Alex and Mina?
Yeah, I thought it was it's really good to see that there are changes happening, and it has felt for a long time that we've fought inertia, and it does look to me like we're starting to see that that hardest initial push coming through. So I think my initial question for Mina, but I'll ask it of Alex as well, is obviously there's lots of challenges, but what is giving you the most hope for the future of the climate resiliency in the built environment and the construction sector?
Thank you, Henry, for that question. I'll sort of respond it in the context of the sort of climate education and the topic we're particularly discussing today. But I think the main hope I have is that there is tremendous effort that has been pulled together across the industry, especially by the Construction Industry Council over the last 2-3 years, much more vigorously than before, perhaps, on really setting out the roadmap and defining guidelines on how various organizations as well as individuals within the sector can engage with this topic and can actually implement meaningful actions in their day-to-day work. And I know that there are many challenges, as I've also highlighted, which became very apparent during the interviews and consultations we've done as part of the study I briefly presented. And I know that these challenges, as Alex has mentioned, they're not going to be overcome overnight, and drastic changes cannot be implemented as fast as we would like them to, because with the respect of the entire sort of historic establishments of various organizations, when I specifically look at professional institutes, and also their sort of governance structure to a certain extent also prevents them from making drastic leaps of changes. And it needs to be done with time and with respect to the many other priorities that the professional institutes especially may have. But the hope, just to go back to answer your question, the hope I have is that there's a lot of guidance out there, both within the CIC's Climate Change Committee's efforts specifically, and also in relation to what we have been trying to progress and proceed with under the umbrella of the Climate Framework Initiative. So hopefully there is a way for everyone to come together to do this. It's just a matter of really putting, I guess, our minds to it and really starting to action and set it out uniquely to the context that we may be operating in. Every professional institute will be different. RIBA has done differently than perhaps others, and I'm sure others will follow sort of various approaches and methods, but I guess to clarify is there is a lot of guidance out there, so there shouldn't be an excuse of not doing it, and there is definitely a great sort of unification that we see across the industry, especially over the last few years, on really wanting to progress the net zero carbon agenda if we want to specifically focus on one topic. So there is definitely the will there and the desire there. It's a matter of actioning that and implementing that into the day-to-day work.
Yeah, they're big beasts, aren't they? And we're talking about, it's the kind of tanker versus speedboat, but when you do turn a tanker, it's going to go in that direction. So
exactly.
A little bit hopeful there. I wonder what Alex thinks of that question. What's giving you the most hope through this work?
I as sitting in a professional body, I see a lot of the professional body interactions and through the CIC, and there's been a massive change in the past 5 years or so, I think, in the way we work together that we didn't used to do very well before, and I think this is a big part of that, big driver. So that's one part, but that's not the thing that gives me the most hope. The thing that gives me the most hope is the membership and their eagerness to learn. So and we know that from conversations, it's all anecdotal obviously, but with our colleagues across the different professional bodies, it's still on everybody's desires, it's on everybody's wish lists to keep that education going. So we know that it's not just we want to do it, and yes, there are a collection of like very, very dedicated people through the CIC framework, through the Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. There's like 300 odd people working on that, and giving data and working on developing that standard, all for free.
Wow,
it's a massive endeavor. So that's very hopeful in the first place.
That is inspiring. That rather easy question, the softball question, has seemed to have prompted lots of people to come in, Stephen. So I wonder if you want to pass over to some of those.
Thank you. Some questions are coming in now. So, but before I just address those questions to you all, I guess I should add, for those of you who aren't aware of the action plan, it is available on the Construction Industry Council's website. We're now the action plan, which seeks to upskill all professionals across the built environment. It's now at the end of its second year. We'll be producing our second annual report, but I would urge you all to, if you haven't seen it, is do go on the CIC website and just have a look at the action plan and the work streams that are contained within it. So we've had some questions in which I'd like to just perhaps put to you all. The first one's from Peter Egan. Hi, Peter. Good to hear from you. And what Peter's asking is, which I think is really important, because all projects start with a client, and Peter's asking, are you looking to create any tools to allow clients to understand how their project may align to the RIBA 2030 sustainable outcomes? Hugely important issue, this. Who'd like to?
I can jump in and say we have done one. I'm going to try and type and put a link in to the chat if that works. We've done. We produced a guide to the 2030 climate challenge for clients. In fact, actually, it's really for professionals to give to clients. That's the idea of it. So it comes with a couple of templates of, does this look like it might be match up with your commitment to this project, client? Does this make sense to you? And if so, maybe you might send this kind of information back to me, so that we know how to engage with you on this specific issue. So there's a bit of that. We probably need to have another look at it. Certainly in light of the more recent work in this area. I think that our 2030 climate challenge is going to need another refresh. So it's already gone through one. It's going to need another one early next year with the Net Zero Carbon Building Standard.
I think we know when I was president of the RIBA, Alex, we had a very active client engagement program. Obviously, I'm not involved with the RIBA as much anyway. But is that program still continuing?
It's not in the same way, I'm afraid, Stephen, despite many pleading representations. Yes, we have something. That doesn't have the same kind of fire, but I think we're establishing how that will work. But yeah, that was quite an important part, and it was our ongoing learning. We have continued to do the learning, as in the surveys to clients. So that really taught us that part of some of the problems was around like technical knowledge, technical understanding, delivery of information to mainly major contractor clients. That was some of our kind of key findings, and trying to fix that. And part of this competence work is exactly for that reason, to try and embed a better, more kind of clear technical understanding in our membership. But again, that's where Mina came in and brought it around to everybody else too.
I think it is an issue, though, isn't it? That and both of you have spoken a great deal about that there's a lot of content out there, but actually directing clients to and bringing focus to where they can go, and make demands of the professionals that are working in the environment. It's just it's so important.
And Stephen, could I also, sorry for interjecting, may I also just add, just to sort of build on what Alex is mentioning, in addition to that guide, there's also, I would say you can use this as a tool, the RIBA Climate Guide also has a section where or actually series of sections throughout the book where we talk about the importance of outcome-based design and the process, sort of the design and the delivery process of built environment projects. And there's definitely a space for engaging the clients and understanding how the client's role is quite critical in this overall sort of successful delivery of sustainable built environments. And perhaps that's the worthwhile resource to look at to understand how the clients can help engage within the process, or how we as built environment professionals can engage with the clients in the right method and process to ensure that we can deliver holistic outcomes in line with the RIBA 2030 climate challenge and others.
I've got a question here from Chris Carter-Rowlands, who's saying, when you talk about CPD for the whole industry, how much work has gone into engaging with wider industry, including private training providers, further education and awarding organisations who deliver the majority of training to the industry? There is already some really good work being done, and this should not be discounted. Who'd like to just...
This is definitely true, and if I can take that on, I think that's a very a great comment, Chris. Thank you for that, and a question sort of to a certain extent. When we, just to be clear, we're not talking about a CPD for the entire industry. We're talking about a framework, a blueprint of a CPD structure that various organizations should and can adopt to customize the CPDs and the training sessions that they may be delivering. In an ideal world, it would be great to have an industry-wide CPD, but it's not realistic because the focus areas, and I can give an example, for example, a structural engineer will look at nature-based solutions from a completely almost different perspective than an architect would, even within the design community, let alone a policymaker or a regulator will look at it. So it's important that they cover the nature-based solutions, which is one of the topics of the climate framework's structure and taxonomy. But the CPD that they may be delivering around the nature-based solutions for structural engineers, for example, that IStructD may be doing, will look very different to the one that RIBA may be doing for architects. I think that's important to emphasize and clarify. And when we were sort of looking at creating this sort of holistic structure and taxonomy, we've looked at as many, we went through about a 6-month process to investigate globally the market and understand what CPD offerings, what training programs exist out there that actually cover some of the topics, or if not all of the topics that are related to the UN SDGs that we wanted to cover within the climate framework. And we realized there is a great frameworks out there. There's One Planet Living, the BREs, even the BREEAM is a framework on its own. There are a lot of various training programs out there, both in professional institutes and also private sort of training providers and academic institutions. But there wasn't one that was actually holistically looking at all the topics in relation to the UN SDGs, as it was already outlined by the sustainable outcomes of the RIBA climate challenge, but also RIBA in general. And therefore, this is to this date, and we've actually been in touch with the UN Habitat and United Nations about this as well as we were developing this framework, is the only framework that brings all of those topics under one umbrella and tries to look at it from the perspective of various actors across the built environment sector, and not just the design community or not just the policymaking sort of community, if I can call it that way, but really tries to unite all different actors' perspectives along the value chain of the built environment sector. Hopefully that helps answer the question that Chris has.
Do you have any thoughts on this, Alex? I mean, in terms of all the work that the RIBA has been doing, to what degree do you share this with the other PIs?
Yeah, I mean, the way we've been doing it is generally being as open as we possibly can. So I sit on two of those work streams on behalf of the RIBA on education and ethics. And what I'm trying to do is just help people along the approach we've taken. So we with ours is about professional revalidation as opposed to mandatory CPD. So perhaps it's a step beyond, or perhaps even too far. We'll see. Hopefully not. So the approach I've been taking is to make sure I'm open and honest about the problems we're having with it, just to give people that kind of feedback. On the CPD creation side of things, we've done a little to try and get interconnectedness, But I think we are still struggling, right, Mina? We're struggling to get everyone to want to do it together. It's not, we're not built that way still. So we all have our own ways of wanting to deliver CPD, and at the moment we're still doing that. We haven't shifted, and perhaps we will. I think that's a harder thing to move. Actually, that's potentially even harder than us imposing things on our members, actually, because it's like our business models, changing our business models, and we don't know what the next one will be. But it's not impossible. I think we need to do more sharing, and we're happy to have people have access to our content, and there is plenty out there. We've obviously taken part in the generation of a whole load of it as part of the Climate Frameworks website, and that's a great resource.
Mina, I just wonder whether it's worth you just touching on the work that you've been doing with Workstream 1 and Alan Williams and the University College of Estate Management, because there's a CPD framework there, isn't there, that's free to access for everyone. I just wondered if you'd like to just touch on that. And
there is, and I'm more than happy if Aled also would like to come in to sort of elaborate more on this. But thank you, Stephen, for bringing that up. What we have done with the UCM, especially under the umbrella of the Workstream 1 of the Climate Change Committee of the Construction Industry Council over the last 2 years, is to actually create these freely accessible. At the time, I think now there is an iteration of it that is no longer freely accessible, but for almost 2 years there was freely accessible, newly created, completely from scratch content that was specifically looking at energy and carbon, sort of net zero energy and carbon. And that was the sort of the desire that the UCM had, wanting to share and demonstrate a model of working in collaboration with various organizations, individuals that are representing various organizations that have put together this content together with the academics at the UCM to demonstrate how a model could work, where we can have high level, maybe not expert level, but high level content freely accessible on their websites, which I think was a great success. And now it's going through different iterations as more level of expertise and specialism is added, and the modules are being more curated. Hopefully, if I'm not wrong, to the academic needs, then they're actually becoming not freely accessible to everyone as they go into further details, rightfully, because they're a part of the academic program.
And what about the toolkit? Because we've been talking for some time about a CPD toolkit that will be launched. That should be quite soon, isn't it? I believe.
It should be, yes. I think within a matter of a few weeks, we'll be able to launch the toolkit that will enable, again, it will become a tool, a guidance to Chris's point earlier on how professional institutes could engage in implementing climate-focused CPD sessions within their existing programs and or new programs that they may be wanting to create within their organizations.
And again, I believe that would be accessible via the CIC's website.
That's correct, yes.
Let's move on to another question then from Joanne Kwan, who says, do you consider, I mean, this is on a similar theme really, do you consider the more civil engineering and ground engineering professionals? I work in the brownfield industry and their awareness of climate change is low. How do you encourage improvements in these sectors?
If I may just respond to that, Stephen, thank you, Joanne, for that question. And it is going to sound very straightforward answer, but it really is as straightforward as that is. It's just about disseminating all the wonderful work that has been happening around the industry and making sure that we engage those sectors much more perhaps rigorously and meaningfully than we have done in the past. There's a lot of focus, this is my humble personal opinion, but there has been a lot of focus on the architecture, structural engineering, and perhaps building services engineering design community, and less of an engagement, and this wasn't deliberate, I don't think, but less of an engagement with the civil engineers, transportation sort of engineers and so forth. And just because I think maybe one aspect of it, if I can find an excuse, if that's an excuse, is the representing professional institutes have been less active in this collaborative platform and environment that especially CIC has been creating over the last few years. RIBA, ISTRACTI, and CIBSE, I don't mean to isolate them, but they have been so proactive and active in the conversations and wanting to really work together. And perhaps we need more of that similar desire and incentive from other professional institutes that are representing other engineering disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, because we have 40 PIs signed up to the action plan. And you know, I try and say at every committee meeting, really, that this is not just about endorsing the action plan; it's to be active in implementing it. And I think you're right that, you know, PIs are operating at different speeds, and it's quite a challenge to get people, you know, to get the PIs to collaborate. But we've made some significant inroads, I think. You know. I've got a question from Robin Nicholson. Good to hear from you, Robin. I think this is particularly addressed to you, Alex. That he's saying, you know, while 3 should be no real surprise that the smaller practices are opposed to this change, I wonder if there's an age element in this. Either way, how do you engage that group? There's a challenge for you.
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, I mean, we did do some work to try and unpack what that result was. The problem is, as soon as you start talking to people and you're face to face, it's really difficult to argue against having to have mandatory competencies in these areas. So it's like we kind of knew we would get it through all of our approval processes, because you can't argue against it. No one doesn't want it. So as soon as you start talking to somebody about it, so why don't you think this practice size, or you in particular, not that we went back to any individual people because that wasn't part of the survey, but trying to do some kind of qualitative rather than quantitative. And it's impossible to get people to say no, because, you know, as soon as you're in there and you're looking at the whites of their eyes, then they are already on board. So not that we can do that with everybody. That will take forever. That's the long tail end of the profession, and that's just architects. But the kind of approach we're taking is more around, because the idea is mandatory. Those who are maybe a little bit disconnected from us, and that'll be the case in every professional body, at some point they are connected in some way, because they're still paying subscriptions, right? Even if that's the only thing they do, they're still having that connection, and they won't be able to do it because they won't have the tick box having passed this assessment. So at that point, they'll be looking to us to either say, can I be exempt? Which we'll say no to, or are they going to leave, or are they going to do some training, or are they going to use existing skills they already have that we just don't know about because we don't know them very well? So I think that's why the mandatory competence approach, that was the whole point of it, because we wanted to make sure we definitely picked everybody up. It wasn't just a way of saying, we want you to do CPD and we will check your record every now and then, maybe. It had to be a bigger shift. That's the approach, at least.
Yeah.
And Alex, sorry, Stephen, I just wanted to address a question to follow up on this one to Alex. And I wonder, maybe less than a question, but more of maybe a suggestion of an idea. Could the RIBA perhaps encourage some sort of like a co-learning model for the smaller practices? Because I think the majority challenge, and I have a couple of friends who own smaller practices, and they just say they don't have the time or the capacity to learn, let's say, and they're, as you're saying, they're probably a little bit more removed from the sort of day-to-day climate-focused demands, because they look at, and I don't mean to say this in any bad way, but they look at much smaller sort of interventions that happen to like a house, for example, or something like that. And that's why their focus is so their work is so focused, and I'm trying to choose the right words. Their work is so focused that it does not have perhaps room to build more information and add more layers of knowledge to it, and perhaps enabling them to join forces together and do some sort of like a co-learning to be able to pass the mandatory competence exams, or also to remain upskilled in the process in the coming years, might be a good way for RIBA to think about what that model could look like.
Absolutely. I think that's what we'll need is different approaches. So, you know, I think we're already going to be changing. We've been delivering the CPD in this area in the same way for a few years now. we're looking to change that up a bit for the next one, try and shorten the time, try and pack more in, do it in a bit more interactive way. So we're looking at changing the content. We're going to need lots of different forms and lots of different approaches, and trying to build lots in is introductory, and then going to nitty gritty in detail as well. So we're going to have a full library of material that's accessible and easy to digest. And because we do recognize it's people's time, right? They're busy people already, and we're imposing more on them. So we need to be careful about not losing them because they decide it's not for them anymore. And perhaps, Robin's point, is there an age dimension? I don't think there is necessarily. It's hard to know. We can make some guesses, and we definitely see that the younger generation is a lot more actively interested in this area and trying to make change, push for change, and we can that's obvious to us all, which perhaps doesn't exist at more senior levels. But I don't think that it means it's a difference. People got into this game for the same reason generally, which was betterment of our society. And I think they're all part of the same thing. It's just building the technical knowledge is perhaps not as easy once you've been in it for so long.
I think we'd like to come on to this generational issue, and I think this is a question that's been put to the panel from Simon Foxall. I should have added that hi Simon, both Simon and Robin, who posed the previous question, are from the Edge think tank, for those of you who aren't aware. And they were very much, very, very instrumental in the launch of the action plan. It was it was in a way the Edge's action plan that the CIBSE absorbed, and we've got to credit them a huge amount for really being a catalyst to this process. Simon's, this is an issue about universities. Simon's saying, we know that the institutions have started to respond to the climate and biodiversity emergency, even if, as said, this is fairly slow. But how are the educational organisations, especially universities, responding? And are they showing any signs of doing that on a cross-disciplinary basis? Now, this brings into the RIBA validation process here. I'm not sure what other institutions are doing, but and certainly, there's an issue there, isn't there, about cross-disciplinary implementation. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll go in certainly on that kind of validation side of things. I've just that director of education is messaging me right now, and she looks after that process. Yeah, we've already started to make a shift. So we've changed what it is that we're looking for, and for our and there'll be comments, and there's definitely comments that we'll get to next about. We're talking a bit architect heavy at the moment, but I'll go back to that just because that's the area I know, and it'll be the area that Mina knows. But we've got the ARB's changing requirements too, so we've got a whole different approach. So they published their guidance on what they expect the knowledge of an architect should be in climate and in fire safety issues, so we've already adapted a bit from that, and the next part will be a bigger change in what they might expect the process to becoming an architect to change into, and our oversight of universities or support to universities to help them prove that they meet a really high bar. We're continually adapting that, tweaking that, and we can get our assessors to look into more detail and technical matters. So that's the kind of change that we've been imposing. I couldn't speak on behalf of other organizations because I don't know how they're operating in that area. I think that's maybe our panel is a bit architect heavy.
And maybe I could just add briefly the study that we've done with the Standing Conference of Heads of Schools of Architecture, the RIBA Architects Climate Action Network and Climate Framework over the last 2 years. We've done a survey across at least those academic institutions that are RIBA members, but also under the umbrella of the SCOSA. And the survey looked at understanding the academic program gaps against the topics of the climate literacy mandatory competence knowledge schedule of the RIBAs. And the first phase, and the results of this survey and study has not been published yet, because there's a second phase to it that we want to complete before we can make this public knowledge. But in this first survey, the results demonstrated that there is a significant gap in the topics of, for example, water and connectivity and transport and circular economy in the way that the academic programs currently address the sustainability, if I can describe it at a very high level, or climate change related issues within their existing programs. And then the next part of the survey will look at understanding how these gaps could be best filled, whether it's within different departments of the same university, like let's say an architecture sort of department is collaborating with an engineering department to be able to bring in the skills and the knowledge that is needed to be able to fill those gaps. Or maybe a second model could be that it's bringing industry practitioners to teach and to bring these expertise, especially from their first-hand experience in delivering on those topics within their day-to-day work. Those are sort of perhaps more of a shorter-term solution that can be addressed to help fill those knowledge gaps. But then the third is, and which is something we would highly encourage, but I'm not sure, again, this may go back to the similar issue we see within professional institutes and why there's this sort of lack of smooth collaboration. The third option will be to encourage universities to collaborate amongst each other, to leverage perhaps a university's stronger a stronger, I guess, maybe expertise and knowledge on one subject matter in relation to other universities, and then encouraging that collaboration to cross-pollinate that experiences and expertise across universities. But I think that's the third model we would look at and encourage, but that's probably the less likely one that's going to be adopted immediately, just because of the many similar rights of how various academic institutions want to structure their programs, even though they all follow a similar framework in line with the RIBA and ARB requirements. Obviously, the way they want to emphasize them is very different from one school to another.
Can we just broaden this? I mean, as you said, Alex, you know, that this panel is probably architect heavy. Maybe I should draw you in on this, Henry, because, you know, I think there's a question, I'm going to jump over a few questions, but there's a question from Joe Pitts Cunningham, which is saying, you know, how can we open this up to wider audiences? You know, we spoke at the beginning about clients, but how do we open this? How do we improve accessibility? And you know, we've all talked about collaboration. You know, that's very much the remit of the Construction Industry Council. But how can we do that? Do you have a view on this, Henry?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I certainly do. I think there's a temptation in this sort of space to go and do it every time you get it in your heart that we need to go and do something different. Somebody creates a new initiative, and that's wonderful, and that needs to happen. So I'm a part of Zero Construct. There's the recent Circular Built Environment movement. There's lots of these, and I think what the Construction Industry Council does well, by its very nature, is bring people together. And I think it's not necessarily about trying to own or control, but I think it's about bringing people together. And I think that's really been a key part of the initiatives that I've seen work. You know, UK Green Building Council, the Green Building Council kind of worldwide, is that there's a real need to connect people. And I think what I've seen from kind of my interactions is you have people at the very top who understand that something has to change, and they are willing to set that direction and say, right, okay, our organization, whether it's a professional institution, whether it's a large client, or whether it's a consultancy, architect or whatever, we want to go do that. And then there's people at the bottom. You know, we talked about those people who are delivering the work. They really want to make that change, and they want to be part of that change. But the problem is always in the middle, and I've operated in the middle, and it's not their fault. It's just that everything is set up to measure on how things are already done. So I think it's about bringing people together so that we can overcome these challenges that we all know need to be solved. So I think that's going to be a key part of this, is that, you know, that applies across everything. So it could just as well be in our professionals world, in our professional capacity, but also with our clients. So there are some great examples, and I think they need to be celebrated. I think I was just looking at one just now where Nottingham City Council have pledged to reduce the carbon and energy in their housing stock, and that data is all available, and they're out there making that happen. So I think we need to rally around these great initiatives, bring people together, and that's how we'll make that difference. Yeah,
and Joe, I would from myself, I would urge you to do have a look at the Construction Industry Council's website. Once the toolkit is launched, as I said earlier, that will be accessible to all. The CIC. I always had an ambition that this area of the CIC's website should be a one-stop shop, which can then direct you. And even now, the progress report on the action plan really directs you to other areas on this issue. So that's one means by which you can that we can open it up to the wider audience. On this issue of university, I'd like to come and education. I'd just like to come back to that. Mark Dewsbury saying, a shift in university content is currently a hot topic. Challenges range from those who don't believe in climate change to older staff who have no skills in these areas. It will be a slow process of identifying the next generation of professionals.
That next generation point comes up quite a few times in the questions, doesn't it? There's quite clearly we need to make this more accessible to a wider audience.
Most definitely. And on that same theme, Simon Sturgis, hi Simon, I fully agree that education is fundamental to solving the climate issue, but how do you reach those up and down the UK who only have minimal connection to their professional institutions? Who'd like to tackle that one?
I'll give a tiny part, which is that, like I was saying with Nottingham City Council, sometimes it will be those clients that will push that connection, and we've got to bring, it isn't just for the people making the design and building the design and operating the asset to do. It is a holistic problem.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, just speaking from my experience in practice now, the majority of local authorities, when it comes to making planning applications, are a requisite component is how a building is contributing to respective the sort of net zero agendas, and which is causing practices to have to engage with this issue, really right at the beginning of design. Tristan Oliver, hi Tristan. There's a number of questions from you.
Some great. I love the Einstein quote. Classic, Tristan.
This is quite a long one, so
he kind of rephrases it lower down, I think.
Yeah, okay.
I think the lower.
I'll go with the long one, Henry.
Okay.
Albert Einstein observed that if you cannot explain something to a 6-year-old, you do not understand it. I'm concerned about the absence of a consumer/society category beyond the industry and academia. To what extent is the notion of academia intended to reach down to primary and secondary education? Building blocks have a timeless/unique place in the development of many children who provide a powerful tie-in to construction and its ability to educate much more broadly. Given the power of pest power, as every parent knows, the climate framework seems too complex to be teachable to many that need an opportunity to develop the necessary foundational awareness. Are we missing the opportunity for adults to learn from children's relentless demand for understanding and action, a bottom-up educational approach? Who'd like to have a go at that? I mean, this sort of touches on the beginning as well, doesn't it, about clients and so on, but this issue of communication.
Stephen, maybe I could just take to help answer, sort of clarify some aspects. Today's presentation wasn't necessarily focused on in detail about the climate framework, but climate framework can be seen very complex if you go all down to all the level of detail that we have, but that's not for everyone. The tier 3 level, the very complex sort of detailing of the climate framework structure is meant for experts, for subject matter experts, and not for the general audience. Whereas the general audience is meant to understand the 6 topics. So if someone can help answer, what do we mean by circular economy in the context of the built environment sector? If that question can be answered, then they already have captured one of the main topics of the climate framework at what we call at tier 1 level. So there are different degrees of layering and detailing around the climate framework, and we've structured it based on a tiered structure for that reason, so that we can engage a child. I mean, a child of what age is debatable, but a child can understand those 6 topics only, versus someone who's practicing and who's implementing that knowledge into their day-to-day work will need to engage around 30 topics, and then an expert will engage into 150 topics to become the experts, and that's why they're called experts. So hopefully that helps answer that part of clarify that part of the question.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Alex or Henry?
I would, yeah. I mean, it's a really great question. Thanks, Tristan. And I think I imagine other bodies do the same kind of thing. We have a learning program, so we try and put architects in front of school kids. And so we have an approach to trying to deliver that. We have a space in our building as well. We bring school kids in and it's full all the time. And we do try to put in a kind of sustainability focus into that, but we're not borrowing from this work to do it. So that's a shift that we can do. I can make that recommendation today, and we can go and look at how we might better fix that up a bit better, rather than it being a whole different thing. Trying to look at sustainability from a child's perspective rather than wants, and then embedding it through. And as Mina said, it does work in some degree, and perhaps you might be older kids, but still there's something in there, and there's things we can do to change and do a better job at that.
Do we know what the other PIs are doing in this regard? I mean, obviously, I know the RIBA is very active and it has the Core Learning Gallery within Portland Place. But do any of us know what the other institutions do in terms of engaging, with the next generation? No,
I think the primary response has been through the power of committees. That's certainly how it's being done at the IET. There are various, there's a sustainability and climate change committee, and that is the piece that is looking at that, and they're trying to engage and educate their members. So I think that's probably the most common approach, I would say, is through that sort of awareness raising.
Yeah. Tristan's posed another question. Work stream 10 of the action plan on competence and ethics, which Simon Foxall, who tabled a question earlier and chairs and is very active. But Tristan's saying, what consideration in the framework is given to competence and ethics assessment? We'd like to.
I can go in and again talk about what we're doing there, and I can then talk about a mistake that we made as part of that process. So on the screen I showed the what we call knowledge schedules. So we're talking about mandatory competence, but at the first we're really only assessing knowledge, so some form of test of knowledge. And we've been doing that for health and safety for a little bit. We know that works. We're going to follow the same model for climate literacy because we think it works. It's not abnormal. It's the kind of thing that you would do if you're a lead assessor or a BREEAM assessor. You go through that kind of process, as Mina has instructed me. But it's not the same for ethical practice. So we called it a knowledge schedule, but what we really meant was behaviors. These are behaviors. It's not knowledge. There's of course learning associated with it, but what we want to assess, or at least maybe change, is people's behaviors. We want people to have the complex and difficult conversations about what work to do and when to do it, where to do it, And you know, clearly there's a massive overlap with the climate literacy area too. What we're now looking at is how we might try and assess or try and build in some form of behavioral change in through CPD and some kind of integrated assessment process instead, because it's just it's not going to work if we try and get people to do multiple choice test. Like you've got behavior and you've got your declared behavior, which might be totally different to your actual behavior, and therefore it's not useful for us. So we're now stuck. We're now we're same with everybody else, looking with Simon at what that means. What's the change we need to implement? How do we do it? So we kind of come back a few steps backwards in that area again, because this one is a lot more difficult as an approach to look at from a mandatory perspective.
And Alex, could I also ask, maybe just to add on that, because I think it's a great point and very complex, I think, area to unpack and unravel in a very short time frame we have. But I think it's worth talking about. You talked about the knowledge which can be tested. Talked about the behavioral change, which could also be assessed, but behavioral change could be assessed in a sort of in a shorter term. Behavioral change can happen in a shorter time frame. Whereas skills, when we talk about skills, that's a longer, because skills are built with experience, right? And so how are we, and when we talk about competence, it's more about knowledge and skills, and of course the behavioral change comes a part of it. But how do we, and this is not just necessarily a question to the RIBA, but in general, maybe to everyone, to think about how are we going to evaluate skills?
The way we've been treating it is a lot of the skills that we will require are still taught at university. So I think we're covering off much of the skills that we expect. Now there'll be individual training programs that might be able to tackle more. It's actually the experience part that we were more concerned about. So we think about competences as knowledge, skills, and experience, and behaviors as well. Experience. So the RIBA runs the professional education development record. It's a web tool for students to be able to track their professional experience and log it, have their mentor oversee that, and their professional studies advisor. We're the only provider for it. It's not. If there was another one, then people might have some. There might be some competition in the market. But it's just us for the moment, and it has been for a long time. But we then don't require professionals to continue to use it after they qualify. And that is perhaps the change we want to make, is if we're going to take this mandatory competence part really seriously, the next thing is, what's the ongoing experience log that a professional might want to, or we might want a professional, or the industry and clients might want professionals to be able to prove. And once you start tracking experience, you're then starting to look at things that can help for procurement purposes too. You know, at the moment, the PAS 91 or the Build UK's common assessment method, it talks about, it's all corporate. So you can't just bring somebody in who has worked on a school recently and then therefore you're now competent at delivering schools. You have to, as a company, have to have worked on a school within the past 5 years. Otherwise you can't win that work, right? That's the PQQ problem. Well, if we're starting to track professionals really carefully and what experience they have, you probably could port that, and perhaps we'd have a good chance at trying to amend those standards to be able to look at individual competence too, and then those people who are able to demonstrate skills that are the experiences that are required for a new practice, a different practice to win work, then there will be more in demand. So then it then puts the onus on the practices to source people with proven experience, proven competence, and that we'll be able to help architects and others prove that. So that's kind of the next part to it. That's probably a bit longer off, a bit slow, a bit more difficult to do, but it's not impossible because we do it for the education program.
That's it's really interesting. I wonder if that is kind of, I just want to separate that out in kind of my view of this, because there's this sort of the IET's just got silver in investors in the environment accreditation, and there's that sort of, here's an organization, our organization is accredited in a certain way, our professionals are also accredited in another way. And I wonder how that could work in the professional world of, like a client organization could be getting that sort of accreditation, and that's part of their process, is making sure that they have a supply chain that is similarly accredited so that they can do the work, but they are also living that sustainable approach as well. I wonder if that's something we could explore.
I think there are definitely big kind of commercial developers who do that already. You know, some of the massive ones, members of the Better Buildings Partnership, those kind of level of organizations, you know, that massive commercial developers, they have whole teams that are dedicated to that specific problem and solving it from a general PQQ point, but also from a sustainability perspective, from a professional ethics, climate change perspective. So I think it does exist. Perhaps they might not all be looking at accreditations for it, but it happens. It's probably only happening at the massive level and at those who really already see a big change, and then those are the people we don't need to persuade in the first place. So it might be it's the rest of the client, like the inexperienced clients, which still make up quite a large amount of work, quite a huge number of projects, maybe less in terms of square meters, because they're designing smaller things, they're working on smaller things. But we're totally missing all of that. The health and safety executive have the same thing, right? They're not worried about the big projects as much because they have personal relationships with site managers and the clients. It's the small ones where they have no relationship. They get notification and they don't have the chance to get to everything. Perhaps that's our could be our focus area.
Interesting.
I've had a comment here from Stephen Thompson at the RICS. Hi, Stephen. In response to my question about do we know what other PIs are doing in relating to schools and universities, and he's saying that the RICS has an early engagement across schools and universities in a similar way to the RIBA, and that the RICS is seeking to encourage a clear focus on climate. I'd like to keep in touch with you, Stephen, if I may, because workstream 6, which is finance and risk, obviously the RICS have got a huge role to play in contributing to that workstream. So following this, I'd like to get in touch with you and just try and reinforce your institute's contribution to that particular workstream. Can I come back to Judy Kimpion, who is leading on or co-leading on workstream 3 on operational energy and whole life carbon, is saying, well, what can the CIC and its different work groups do to help CIC member organisations embed the climate curriculum in their own action plans? Perhaps promote successes, share ways of overcoming organisational barriers, support organisations with creating a business case. What do we all think about that?
I think, Stephen, that's a great comment and question from Judith, and it was at the heart of our discovery too. I guess maybe I shouldn't call this discovery, we shouldn't be surprised, but it was still at the heart of our findings of this study that we've done last year with the London South Bank University. I think it's important to really understand, but I would say in that study, even we scratched the surface of the challenges that the various professional institutes are facing today. It would be really good to, and maybe this is an opportunity for us collectively, and especially under the umbrella of the CIC, to arrange a session, almost like a workshop, to really understand, get to the bottom of why professional institutes that have actually signed up to the CIC's climate action plan, why to this day they have not been effectively implementing everything that is listed on that climate action plan, and with the focus on today's conversation on this cross-industry climate curriculum framework. And we don't know, there are many components and elements to why they haven't done that, but it would be great to understand, to really get to the bottom of that and really work together towards a solution. Because what we've done is that we've only extracted that information through our interviews and consultations as part of that study to understand why they haven't been able to do it. And we've been able to identify barriers and the challenges they're facing. And then we actually, as the climate framework sort of volunteer group, we put together suggestions based on the efforts that have been pulled together under the CIC and others of what solutions could there be out there. But we have not tested whether those solutions are feasible. We have not gone back to all those professional institutes that we have interviewed to say, can you think about a new business model? We talked about this before, that will promote a greater collaboration across professional institutes, or can you add more capacity in terms of manpower, or in terms of financial sort of capacity to your existing training department, for lack of a better description, to be able to build new content as needed. So what I'm trying to say, that we have not tested the solutions that we proposed back with the professional institutes, and to really get their insights of what's feasible and what's valuable to them. So it'd be great to organize an event or some sort of a session where we can collectively work together to find solutions of how we can enable them to implement the CIC's climate action guidelines.
We've got 5 minutes left before we conclude this webinar. I want to come on to, before I ask each of you just for a few comments, I want to come on to this issue of biodiversity, if I may. And Tristan has posed another question, really, that there seems to be significant differences in the perception of what constitutes climate literacy, especially the connections with soil, water, biodiversity, nature-based factors, the source of all our food, which as SDG 2 is absent from the climate framework. What are your thoughts on this issue?
I could help answer to that. SDG 2 is not necessarily absent within the climate framework. It's very much embedded as sort of one of the key goals, or actually all the goals of the United Nations should be comprehensively looked at when we talk about climate literacy or addressing climate emergency and biodiversity emergency within the work that we do within the built environment sector. However, as overwhelming as the UN SDGs are, and as overwhelming sometimes people believe that climate framework has been, it's important to focus. And so what we have done, and this is based on the consultation, on an international consultation we've done, so it's not our opinion necessarily or my opinion, but I'm just voicing the consultation results, is that it's important to contextualize and focus the UN SDGs. All 17 of them cannot be addressed at the same time with the direct impact that we do on a day-to-day basis, with the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, it's important to consolidate and focus on those that we can directly impact. And therefore, the RIBA, even many years ago, before the Climate Framework Initiative, have identified the goals that can be directly impacted with the work, and there's only 8 of them, because those are really, we can see sort of outcomes and results based on what we do on a daily basis. And this is what the UN even suggests that we do. So the focus is essential. And therefore, the climate framework looks at 8 sort of overarching UN SDGs that are linked to the work of the built environment sector professionals today. But then it also acknowledges, but it doesn't talk about specific guidelines on how to reduce poverty, but it talks about the need to acknowledge those indirect impacts that our work does. But we need to be able to provide solutions that can be implemented today that can indirectly help better the other goals of the UN SDGs.
Thanks for that, Mina. So 2 minutes before we close. Final closing remarks. Alex, your thoughts, please.
Well, I mean, I've got some great learning already, and thanks to Tristan and others for that. I think, from our perspective, I want to make sure we don't lose momentum. That's my main concern. Is we've got a lot to work towards, and we've been doing this for some time. So, not that I want to bring a doom and gloom. I want to bring optimism, but I think we've got a good drive, and I think we've got our professional body, this professional body, and many others trying to push for significant change. And we're just at a point now where we could easily just drop it if we don't keep pushing, because I think we're getting to some of the really hard parts. And I think what we need is more of these kind of conversations to help us keep that momentum going.
Yeah. Mina?
I think I just add to that, this has been a very engaging conversation today. We definitely need to have more of it, and we need to ensure that we focus our attentions to the things that we can deliver today and in the near future, because we need to do them fast and also at scale. So I will leave it there.
Thanks for that, Mina. Henry.
I think it's good to see that, you know, we're focused and we think that more can be done, but the UK is world leading in addressing climate change. How that makes you feel is your choice. But that is an opportunity, as Aled Williams points out, 350,000 potential jobs to be created there. So this is a financial opportunity as well as an opportunity to perpetuate our species.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a final comment from me is that, as I said earlier, if you haven't seen the action plan and the various progress reports, do look at the CIC's website and watch out for the forthcoming toolkit, which will hopefully help people with their CPD program on what is an absolutely essential subject matter. So thank you all for listening. Thank you to everyone on the panel, Alex, Mina and Henry. Thank you for everyone for posing questions and statements which enabled what I hope people have found as a really engaging discussion. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Stephen.